every time she opens her mouth, talagang when she forgets that she's a lawyer, and being a lawyer, she should know that the Constitution says that is my function. It is not their function. Pagkaalam kasi ni Robredo, parang we are nothing wrong with America and the Philippines. Hindi niya alam na ano kaya ikaw, ma'am, I'm sorry to say, you are not really qualified to run for president. You do not know your role in this government. I said, if by unfortunate chance you become the president, please study more. I think that you need a refresher course sa law. That is my advice to you. You do not use this word, mga extortion. When we say you pay, dapat talaga magbayad.
The Newsday continues here on One News Now. I'm Charles Lejano. President Rodrigo Duterte slammed Vice President Leni Robredo after she accused the government of trying to use the Visiting Forces Agreement to extort money from the U.S. The chief executive reserved a portion of his weekly pandemic address to go on a lengthy rant questioning Robredo's legal knowledge. To give us more context, we have Maricel Halili reporting live from Mandaluyong. Good afternoon, Maricel. Let's contextualize this latest tiff between the president and the vice president. What exactly did Duterte say, and why did Robredo call it an embarrassing attempt at extortion?
Hi, Charles. If you recall, last week the president made the public address where he mentioned about the Visiting Forces Agreement between the Philippines and the United States. In that specific public address or that specific speech, I think that was in Camp Aguinaldo, if my memory serves me right, the president mentioned that we deserve to receive payment from the United States if the U.S. wants to continue or to pursue having a VFA with the Philippines, because for the president, it seems that the Americans are receiving more benefits from the agreement compared to the Philippines. So the president is basically saying that he just wants to push for the interest of the Filipino people. And for Vice President, hearing this kind of message, she thinks that this is a form of extortion by the government.
But President Duterte did explain later on the reason why he wants the U.S. to pay if they wanted the VFA to continue. What was his justification?
All right. If we base it on the agreement, VFA as well as EDCA, American soldiers are allowed to use military camps all over the country. So if the American military are receiving this kinds of benefit, the president also wants the Filipino people to have this kind of benefit. They mentioned, or Secretary Roque mentioned, that Pakistan is also an ally of the United States, and they're receiving about $16 billion from the United States as compared to $3 billion that they gave to the Filipino people. So it's a huge amount of money. Difference between the amount of money that Pakistan has received is has a big difference compared to what we have received. Aside from this, the president also mentioned that when the national government tried to buy firearms from the United States, it takes a while, or they even rejected, some of the senators even rejected or declined the request of the Philippines to buy firearms from them. Even when we requested to have planes or choppers, it will take a while before they grant our request. So these are some of the sentiments of President Duterte.
Right, then the president had a lengthy statement as regards legal knowledge of certain politicians, particularly knowledge of the Philippine Constitution with respect to the Vice President Leni Robredo on one hand, and also Senator Ping Lacson on the other. What was the president referring to here, and what was his point?
President Duterte, in his public address last night, said that if we base it on the Constitution, he has the sole prerogative to decide on the foreign policy. Basically, he's the chief architect of the foreign policy of the Philippines. That's what he's claiming. And so the president mentioned that the vice president should study the Constitution, considering that she's also a lawyer. When it comes to Senator Ping Lacson, President Duterte mentioned that Senator Ping Lacson has nothing to do with the issue because he's a senator. And like what the president said, if we base it on the Constitution, he is the sole architect of the foreign policy. If you recall, Charles, in a tweet by Senator Ping Lacson, he mentioned that to the American government, not all Filipinos are extortionists. So it's the same context as what Vice President has mentioned.
Right. I think it is that tweet, Mase, that caught the president's attention. But then what did Senator Ping Lacson have to say about this most recent statement?
You mean the reaction of Senator Ping Lacson from the statement of President Duterte last night? We still have to get it from Senator Lacson this morning. What can he say about the statement of President Duterte last night?
All right, Mase, but isn't it true that senators actually quite have a say in the country's international agreements under the Constitution?
If we base it on the statement of President Duterte last night, it seems that the Constitution is allowing the president to have the sole prerogative or being the chief architect of foreign policy. But if we base it on what happened in the recent history, of course, the senators still have the say on the policies, local policies particularly, of the country. But, you know, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not an expert to explain those things, Charles.
All right, let's leave the tiff to those lawyers involved. But then, do we have any other salient matters that were raised at last night's address?
Last night, during the public address of President Duterte, it is interesting that Acting Secretary Charles of NEDA, Acting Secretary Chua of NEDA, mentioned that he is recommending to impose MGCQ or Modified General Community Quarantine all over the country starting March 1. He specifically mentioned the loss that the employees have suffered because of the imposition of the enhanced community quarantine or the lockdown last year. About 1.04 trillion pesos is the estimate total loss from the workers during the imposition of lockdown last year. So for Secretary Chua, he thinks that it's high time to implement modified general community quarantine by March 1. But we still have to get the approval of the IATF, or we still have to hear from Malacanang. What does the President think about this?
Maybe quite the gamble to go to MGCQ at this point. Thanks for everything, Mase. That was Maricel Halili reporting live from Mandaluyong. We'll be back with more stories after the break. Keep it here on One News. You're still watching One News Now. I'm Charles Lehano. Human rights and militant groups are calling for the release of over 20 students and teachers of a Lumad school in Cebu after the police took them away in a raid. But the PNP says this was just a rescue operation. Patricia Mangune with the story.
Tension filled this Bakwit school at the University of San Carlos in Talamaban, Cebu City. Police entered according to Save Our Schools network, children and teachers alike were forcibly taken by the police. But for the PNP, this was not an attack, but a rescue operation. They said the 20 minors have been transferred safely to the custody of the DSWD, while 7 teachers were arrested as suspects. The PNP said they were accompanied by the Lumad's parents who have been searching for the children the past 2 years. The police claims the minors were trafficked to Cebu to be child combatants of the CPP-NPA. But Save Our Schools Network denies that the Bakwit school was a guise for NPA recruitment. They say the children evacuated from Mindanao on their own free will.
Sila ay kusang lumahok sa ganitong klaseng paglaban. So walang pagpipilit ang mga dato, ang mga teachers na sumama.
The Bakwit School is ran by Lumads and representatives from UP Diliman and the United Church of Christ in the Philippines, based in Davao City. Save Our Children Network says the children were unable to return to their families due to the pandemic, but that they have their parents' consent.
Ito ay mental torture, emotional torture yung mga bata sa ganitong klaseng kalagayan, kahit pandemya ay walang habas, walang tigil yung ganitong pananakot.
Human rights and militant groups protested in front of the Commission on Human Rights to condemn the raid. Protesters say this is a violation of the rights of Lumad children. They call for the release of the arrested teachers and the students taken into government custody. The suspects will face charges of serious illegal detention, human trafficking, and for violating the Special Protection of Children in Situations of Armed Conflict Act. For News 5, Patricia Mangune. We are One News.
The Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, or CBCP, issued new guidelines for Ash Wednesday amid the pandemic. This year's Ash Wednesday, which signals the opening of Lent, falls tomorrow, February 17. Just like last year, the CBCP says ashes will be sprinkled on the heads of the faithful instead of the usual practice of marking foreheads with a cross. Father Jerome Ceciliano, Executive Secretary of CBCP's Public Affairs Committee, says churches now have the option to obtain ashes from dried branches or leaves of plants. This as they anticipate a shortage in supply of blessed palm branches from last year. The CBCP also says those who cannot come to church tomorrow can join the Ash Wednesday Mass on TV or online. Meanwhile, heads of households who can attend physical masses will be given a small plastic sachet containing blessed ashes that they can in turn apply to their family members. Siciliano said rites and prayers for this practice can be accessed on parish's Facebook pages. And those are the top stories of the hour. Join us later at 1 p.m. as we continue to monitor the day's biggest stories. You can also catch One News on the Signal Play app. Register for a free account at www.signalplay.com so you can stream One News live anytime and anywhere. I'm Charles Lejano. We are One News.